The hardest promises to break are the ones you made to yourself. That was the thought echoing through my mind as I stood in front of the mirror, wearing the wedding dress every magazine would have called perfect. Ivory satin caught the morning light. Delicate lace rested gently across my shoulders, and a long veil flowed behind me like the beginning of the future everyone believed I wanted. My mother smiled from the corner of the bridal boutique. My closest friends wiped away happy tears. The consultant adjusted the fabric one final time before asking if I felt beautiful. I looked at my reflection and answered yes, because that was the answer everyone expected. The truth was much quieter. I could not stop thinking about a single question that had followed me for weeks. What did that kiss mean? My name is Emily Harper. I was 34 years old, engaged to a genuinely kind man, surrounded by people who loved me, and only 6 weeks away from my wedding day. From the outside, my life looked exactly like the life I had spent years trying to build. The venue had already been reserved at a historic waterfront estate outside Seattle. Invitations had been mailed. Flowers had been selected. My honeymoon itinerary rested inside a neatly organized folder on the kitchen counter. Every detail was carefully planned. Every expectation had been met. Yet every night, after everyone else had gone to sleep, I found myself staring at the ceiling wondering why happiness felt so strangely distant. It was not because my fiancé had done anything wrong. He was thoughtful, dependable, and endlessly patient. He remembered birthdays, made coffee before I woke up, and always asked how my day had been. I wanted to love him with the certainty he deserved. I truly believed I did, or at least I had convinced myself that love could eventually grow wherever kindness already existed. For a long time, that belief was enough. Then one ordinary Thursday afternoon, everything I had carefully buried beneath years of responsibility quietly returned. It began with a phone call from my wedding planner explaining that the original photographer had accepted another assignment because of a family emergency. She assured me she had already found someone equally talented who could step in without changing the schedule. I thanked her without giving it much thought. At that moment, I had no reason to imagine that a single name on a replacement contract could unravel years of certainty. Later that evening, while organizing vendor emails, I opened the updated photography agreement. My eyes drifted across the page until they stopped on a familiar signature. Claire Donovan. My heartbeat froze before the rest of me did. I read the name again, hoping I had somehow imagined it. I had not spoken to Claire in almost 8 years. I had spent nearly a decade convincing myself that chapter of my life had ended forever. Yet as I stood there holding the printed contract with trembling hands, I realized some stories do not disappear simply because we stop telling them. For the next 3 days, I convinced myself there had to be some mistake. Seattle was full of photographers. Surely there was more than one Claire Donovan. I even searched the studio website, hoping to find a different face attached to the familiar name. Instead, the first photograph that appeared on my screen stole every bit of air from my lungs. It was her. She looked older in the gentle way time changes all of us, yet her warm green eyes carried the same quiet confidence I remembered from years before. Her shoulder-length blonde hair framed a smile that once made every ordinary afternoon feel unforgettable. I closed my laptop immediately, but the image stayed with me long after the screen went dark. The engagement party, the guest list, the seating chart, every wedding detail suddenly felt strangely distant compared to one unexpected name. My fiancé noticed my distraction that evening while we assembled wedding invitations at the dining room table. He reached across the table with an encouraging smile. "Everything will come together. You worry too much." I smiled back because he deserved reassurance, not confusion. "You are probably right," I answered softly. I wanted to believe those words as much as he did. The following Saturday arrived with bright autumn sunshine and clear blue skies. It was time for our engagement photo session at the waterfront park overlooking Elliott Bay. I arrived early, hoping the replacement photographer would still be someone else. Deep down, I already knew the truth. I stood near the pier watching small ferries cross the water, while a cool breeze carried the scent of salt and cedar through the air. Then I heard footsteps behind me followed by a familiar voice speaking my name with gentle surprise. "Emily." I turned around slowly. Claire stood only a few feet away holding two professional cameras over one shoulder. For a brief moment, the sounds of passing traffic, distant seagulls, and laughing families disappeared completely. We simply looked at one another as though 8 years had collapsed into a single heartbeat. Claire offered a polite smile first. I did not know this assignment was yours until yesterday. I considered asking someone else to take it. I swallowed carefully before answering. I almost canceled. She gave a quiet laugh filled with equal parts relief and nervousness. I guess neither of us did. Before either of us could say anything else, my fiancé walked over carrying coffee for everyone. Claire immediately became calm and professional, introducing herself with the same friendly confidence she offered every client. Watching her shake his hand while thanking him for choosing the studio felt strangely unreal. Throughout the photo session, she remained completely respectful, offering directions with an easy smile and focusing entirely on her work. Yet every now and then our eyes met for only a second, and each silent glance carried years of conversations we had never finished. As the afternoon came to an end, Claire handed me a small card with the pickup date for our photographs. Our fingers brushed for the briefest instant, and although neither of us reacted outwardly, I drove home wondering why one completely innocent moment could awaken emotions I believed had quietly disappeared forever. The entire week after the engagement photo session felt strangely unfamiliar, as though someone had quietly rearranged the furniture inside my heart while leaving everything else exactly where it had always been. Every morning, I followed the same routine. I made coffee, answered work emails, reviewed wedding plans, and smiled whenever someone asked if I was excited. The answers came automatically, but the certainty behind them had begun to disappear. I kept remembering the way Claire had looked at me across the waterfront, not with regret or expectation, but with the calm kindness that had always made me feel completely understood. I told myself it was only nostalgia. People often romanticize the past when life becomes stressful. That explanation sounded reasonable until I realized I had never once romanticized any other chapter of my life with the same quiet ache. 3 days later, my phone reminded me that the engagement photographs were ready for pickup. I considered asking my fiancé to collect them instead, but something inside me resisted the idea. Late that afternoon, I drove to Claire's photography studio on the edge of downtown Seattle. The building occupied a renovated brick warehouse filled with natural light, framed landscapes, and shelves lined with cameras collected over many years. Soft instrumental music drifted through the room while autumn sunlight poured across polished wooden floors. Claire looked up from editing photographs and smiled with gentle surprise. "Right on time," she said. I laughed softly. "You always hated when I arrived early." She smiled a little wider. "Some things never change." The conversation felt effortless, almost unsettling in its familiarity. She handed me the finished album, and together we slowly turned each page. The photographs were beautiful, but what caught my attention most was not the scenery or the carefully chosen lighting. It was my own smile. I had not realized how carefully I had been smiling for years until I saw one photograph where Claire had captured an unguarded laugh while my fiancé was telling a joke. "You always knew how to notice moments other people missed," I said quietly. Claire closed the album before answering. "That was never difficult when it came to you." Silence settled between us, comfortable yet heavy with everything we had left unsaid. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the tall windows. I looked toward the street and sighed. "Looks like I might be here for a while." Claire glanced at the weather before walking toward the small coffee station in the corner. "Then you should at least have something warm." We sat beside the window, watching the rain blur the city lights. Eventually, she asked the question I had secretly expected from the moment we met again. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. Her voice remained gentle. "Were you really happy when we said goodbye all those years ago, or were you just trying to protect everyone except yourself?" I stared into my coffee without answering. For the first time in 8 years, I realized I no longer knew the difference. The rain continued long after the coffee had gone cold. Neither of us seemed interested in watching the clock, yet neither of us crossed the invisible line that still separated the past from the present. I finally looked up from my cup and answered the question I had been avoiding for years. I thought leaving was the right thing to do. Claire listened without interrupting. My parents wanted a simpler future for me. They believed I would have an easier life if I walked away from us. After a while, I convinced myself they were probably right. Claire nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful instead of disappointed. I remember thinking you stopped loving me. I shook my head almost immediately. That was never true. The words escaped before I had time to soften them. Silence settled between us once again, but this time it felt different. The truth had finally entered the room, and neither of us tried to push it away. Claire smiled sadly before looking toward the rain-covered windows. Do you know what hurt the most? She asked.
I quietly answered no.
You never gave me the chance to choose the hard road with you. You made the decision for both of us. I closed my eyes for a brief moment because I knew she was right. For years I had called my choice selfless, when in reality, it had also been driven by fear. Fear of disappointing my family. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of a future I could not control. We talked for nearly another hour, not to rewrite history, but to understand it. When the rain finally began to ease, I stood and thanked Claire for the photographs. She walked me to the front door with the same quiet warmth she had shown all afternoon. Just before I stepped outside, she spoke my name one more time. I turned back. She looked at me with calm honesty and said, "Whatever happens next, I hope you choose the life that lets you sleep peacefully at night."
There was no request, no confession, no expectation.
Only kindness. I nodded, unable to find the words that belonged in that moment. As I reached for the door handle, a sudden gust of wind pushed the door open, carrying cool rain into the studio. Instinctively, we both reached to steady it at the same time. Our hands met for only a brief second before our eyes followed. The distance between us disappeared almost without either of us noticing. There was no plan and no promise. There was only one quiet moment, filled with years of unfinished feelings. We shared a brief, gentle kiss born from recognition rather than impulse, and the instant it ended we both stepped back in stunned silence. Neither of us smiled. Neither of us spoke. I whispered a trembling goodbye before walking into the fading rain, carrying one question that echoed through every step home. What did that kiss really mean? 4 days after that evening, I replayed the moment over and over in my mind, searching for an explanation that would make everything feel simple again. The kiss itself had been brief, almost hesitant, yet the emotions it awakened refused to disappear. I kept asking myself the same question every morning while getting ready for work and every night before falling asleep. Was it only a memory finding its way back, or had it revealed a truth I had spent years trying not to face? Wedding plans continued moving forward without hesitation. My mother called to confirm the final flower arrangements. My friends texted ideas for the rehearsal dinner. My fiancé excitedly counted down the weeks until we would finally be married. I answered every conversation with a smile that grew harder to maintain each passing day. He noticed the change long before I admitted it to myself. One evening while we were choosing songs for the reception, he quietly lowered the volume of the speaker and looked at me with genuine concern. "You have been somewhere else lately," he said softly. "Is everything all right?" I wanted to tell him the truth, but I could not find words that would not cause unnecessary pain before I even understood my own heart. "I have just been overwhelmed with all the planning," I replied. He accepted my answer with the same kindness he had always shown me, and that kindness somehow made my uncertainty even more difficult to carry. A few days later, I received an email from Claire containing the completed digital gallery of our engagement photographs. There was no personal message attached, only a short professional note thanking us for the opportunity to work together. I opened the gallery late that evening after everyone else had gone to bed. Each photograph captured genuine happiness, beautiful scenery, and carefully framed moments, yet one image held my attention longer than the others. It was taken during a quiet pause between poses while I had unknowingly been looking toward the water instead of the camera. My expression was thoughtful rather than joyful, peaceful rather than excited. Claire had somehow photographed the version of me I rarely allowed anyone else to see. The next afternoon, I drove to a nearby park carrying a printed copy of that photograph. I sat on a wooden bench overlooking the lake, studying my own face as autumn leaves drifted across the water. For the first time, I admitted something I had been too afraid to say aloud. My confusion had not begun with the kiss. The kiss had only uncovered questions that had been waiting inside me for years. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees, my phone vibrated with a message from Claire. It contained only one sentence. "You do not owe me any answers, Emily. Just promise yourself that whatever decision you make next will be honest." I read those words several times before quietly placing my phone back into my pocket, realizing that the hardest conversation still lay ahead, and it was not with Claire. It was with myself. The closer the wedding came, the more carefully I performed the role everyone expected
Me to play.
Every appointment, every tasting, every conversation about flowers and seating charts reminded me how easy it was to confuse momentum with certainty. People congratulated me wherever I went, telling me how lucky I was and how beautiful everything would be. I thanked them sincerely because none of them had done anything wrong. The problem was not the wedding itself. The problem was that somewhere along the way I had stopped asking whether the life I was building still belonged to me. Claire respected the distance I had chosen. She never called. She never appeared unexpectedly. She never asked me to explain the kiss or what it might have meant. That silence became its own kind of kindness because it allowed me to confront my thoughts without feeling pulled in any direction except the one my own heart was trying to reveal. One afternoon, while meeting with the wedding planner at the venue, I stood alone on the terrace overlooking the water. The view was breathtaking. Gentle waves reflected the afternoon sunlight, sailboats drifted across the bay, and every detail matched the vision I had imagined for years. Yet instead of feeling excited, I felt like I was looking at someone else's future. My wedding planner smiled as she joined me. "Everything is finally coming together," she said. I nodded politely, but the words echoed strangely inside me. Was everything coming together, or was everything quietly falling apart? That evening, my fiancé found me sitting on the back porch after sunset, still wearing the sweater I had left the house in that morning. He carried 2 mugs of tea and sat beside me without speaking. After several quiet minutes, he finally asked, "Emily, are you afraid of getting married, or are you afraid of marrying me?" His question was gentle, free of accusation, and because of that I could not hide behind another easy answer. Tears filled my eyes before I even realized I was crying. "I do not know," I whispered honestly. He lowered his head for a moment, then looked back at me with heartbreaking compassion. "I think you do know. I just do not think you are ready to say it out loud yet." Neither of us spoke again for several minutes. The silence between us felt painful, but it was finally an honest silence instead of a comfortable illusion. Before going inside, he placed his hand over mine for a brief moment. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly, "please do not marry me because you are afraid of disappointing everyone else." After he walked back into the house, I remained outside watching the last light disappear beyond the horizon. For the first time since accepting his proposal, I admitted the truth I had spent years avoiding. My greatest fear was not ending the engagement. My greatest fear was spending the rest of my life pretending that one forgotten kiss had never reminded me who I truly was. The following morning I woke before sunrise, unable to quiet the thoughts that had followed me through another sleepless night. The house was silent except for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of rain against the kitchen windows. I wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee that had already grown cold, realizing I had been sitting at the table for nearly an hour without taking a single sip. My phone rested beside me, and more than once I considered calling Claire. Each time I reached for it, I stopped. This was no longer about choosing between 2 people. It was about deciding whether I was finally willing to stop hiding from myself. Later that afternoon, I drove to the waterfront without any destination in mind. The same walking path where our engagement photographs had been taken stretched quietly beside the bay. Families strolled along the pier, children laughed as gulls circled overhead, and the world continued exactly as it always had. Only I felt different. As I watched the waves roll toward the shore, I realized I had spent years believing that being dependable was the same as being honest. They were not the same. I had become so determined to avoid disappointing everyone else that I had quietly abandoned my own voice. Just as I turned to leave, I noticed someone standing several yards away with a camera pointed toward the water. It was Claire. She lowered the camera the moment she recognized me. For a brief second, neither of us moved. Then she offered the same gentle smile that had always carried more kindness than expectation. "I come here whenever I need to clear my head," she said. I nodded softly. "I guess I do too now." We walked together along the shoreline without rushing the conversation. Eventually, I apologized for disappearing after the kiss. Claire looked toward the water before answering. "You did not owe me an explanation." I shook my head. "Maybe not. But you deserved honesty." She stopped walking and faced me. "Emily, I need you to hear something." Her voice remained calm, almost reassuring. "I care about you deeply, but I will not ask you to choose me. If you walk away today and marry the life that truly makes you happy, I will accept that. What I cannot accept is watching you choose a future that feels untrue simply because it is familiar." Tears blurred my vision as I realized she was offering me complete freedom instead of another impossible choice. That single act of respect made my feelings even clearer. Before we parted, Claire gently placed a small folded photograph into my hand. It was the candid picture she had taken during our engagement session, the one where I had been looking toward the water instead of the camera. On the back, she had written only one sentence: "The happiest version of you has always been the honest one." I held that photograph all the way home, knowing the next conversation would change every life connected to mine, but also knowing that for the first time in many years, I was finally ready to tell the truth. The night before the wedding arrived with remarkable quiet. Instead of excitement, the house felt suspended between two different futures, waiting for me to decide which one I was willing to live. My wedding dress hung beside the bedroom window, glowing softly beneath the porch light outside. Everyone expected me to feel nervous. No one imagined I was questioning whether I should walk down the aisle at all. I picked up the folded photograph Claire had given me and studied it one more time. The woman looking toward the water seemed peaceful in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. For years I had searched for certainty in plans, schedules, and other people's expectations, believing that if every detail looked perfect, happiness would eventually follow. Instead, I had discovered that peace could never grow from pretending. Just after sunrise, I asked my fiancé if we could take a walk before leaving for the venue. We followed the quiet neighborhood streets without speaking for several minutes. Finally, I stopped beneath a row of maple trees whose golden leaves drifted gently around us. My voice trembled, but my words did not. "I cannot marry you today." He closed his eyes briefly before taking a slow breath. There was sadness in his expression, yet there was also understanding. "Is this because of her?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "She helped me realize something, but this decision is about me. I've been trying to become the person everyone expected instead of the person I truly am." He listened without interrupting, just as he always had. After a long silence, he offered a small, bittersweet smile. "I think I knew before you did." Tears filled both our eyes. "I am so sorry," I whispered. He gently shook his head. "Do not apologize for finally being honest. I would rather lose this wedding than spend a lifetime beside someone who feels trapped." We embraced briefly, not as two people whose love had failed, but as two people choosing honesty over comfort. Later that morning, I called my parents, my wedding planner, and the venue. Every conversation was difficult. Some people were shocked. Others were disappointed. A few struggled to understand. Even so, each truthful sentence made the weight on my shoulders a little lighter. By late afternoon, I found myself standing outside Claire's photography studio once again. Through the front window, I could see her organizing framed prints, completely unaware that I was there. I hesitated with my hand resting on the door handle, realizing that this moment was not about asking for another chance. It was about walking forward without hiding. I opened the door, and the familiar bell echoed softly through the room. Claire looked up in surprise. Before she could speak, I smiled through tears and quietly said, "I finally know what that kiss meant." It reminded me that I cannot build a true future while pretending to be someone I am not. 2 years have passed since the morning I walked away from the wedding, and sometimes I still think about how frightened I was as I opened the door to Claire's studio that afternoon. I believed I was risking everything I had carefully built. What I did not understand then was that honesty never destroys the right future. It simply clears away the one that was never meant to last. Claire did not rush toward me when I arrived that day. She simply looked into my eyes, searching for certainty instead of promises. I smiled through my tears and repeated the words I had carried with me all morning. I am finally ready to live honestly. She walked over slowly and took my hands with gentle care. Neither of us needed dramatic speeches because the hardest conversations had already happened inside our own hearts. We decided to move forward one ordinary day at a time instead of trying to replace one life with another overnight. The months that followed were filled with healing rather than urgency. I met with my family many times, answering difficult questions with patience instead of defensiveness. Some relationships took longer to recover than others, but honesty gradually created understanding where silence had once created distance. My former fiancé eventually found happiness with someone whose dreams truly matched his own, and I was sincerely grateful for that. Looking back, I realized we had given each other the greatest gift possible by refusing to build a marriage on uncertainty. Claire and I slowly created a life that felt peaceful instead of perfect. She continued capturing meaningful moments through her photography, while I left my corporate position to work with a local arts organization, helping young artists discover opportunities they might never have found alone. Every evening we walked along the same waterfront where our engagement photographs had once been taken, but now those paths no longer reminded me of confusion. They reminded me that every important journey begins with a single honest step. One autumn afternoon we returned to the overlook where everything had quietly changed years before.
Claire
Handed me a framed photograph. It was the candid picture she had taken during my engagement session, the one where I had been staring toward the water instead of the camera. Beneath the image, she had written one simple sentence. "The moment you stopped pretending was the moment your real story began." I smiled as I held the frame against my heart, remembering the question that had haunted me for so long. What did that kiss mean? Now I finally understood the answer. It was never simply about love returning from the past. It was about truth finding its way back to me. That single moment had reminded me that happiness is not measured by how perfectly a life appears from the outside, but by how honestly it is lived from within, and every beautiful chapter that followed began the instant I chose to become myself again.